We are encouraged by that announcement because only a short time ago, there wasn't even a conversation.
Tonight, hope for improved relations between the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary and Indigenous peoples on the island.
Membre d'une Première Nation. Ça, c'est quand même spécial. Pour la première fois.
Quebec has its own Indigenous Minister of Indigenous Affairs.
See a polar bear and go to it and hug it.
And one of Nunavut's longest-serving politicians retires after 30 years in office. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. The coroner's inquest into the death of an Ontario First Nations teen 4 years ago wrapped up on Friday with more than 70 recommendations from the jury, many of which focus on more involvement from First Nations in the provincial child welfare system. APTN's Fraser Needham reports.
It's been a long and painful journey for Pamela Freeman. The body of her 16-year-old grandson was found hanging from a tree less than 40 meters from the Hamilton care home he had been staying at in early 2018. But on Friday, she said she finally feels some sense of closure.
I have never seen a room full of people whose lives have changed and are determined their careers are going to be for the best, for when they work with children. Just the testimonies were very emotional. That hope I came in with.
Shannon Crate works in Child and Family Services on the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, Devon's Home First Nation, and she said she was particularly struck by one particular jury recommendation.
The most significant one is the right for a child to return home. So that means any Indigenous child in care could ask their worker if they could visit the community that they come from, whether maybe it's even return there, find family, just to even to visit and put their feet on the land of the community that they came from. And what was really touching was that the jury added, they named that recommendation Devon's Principle.
The month-long inquest began on Georgina Island and finished in Hamilton. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
To Quebec now, where the new roster of provincial ministers were unveiled on Thursday. And while it was a year of history-making firsts, it was also a year for controversial second chances that may impact the province's Indigenous agenda. Here's Lindsay Richardson with more.
Here they are, the 30 ministers of Quebec's National Assembly. This year, seated among them,
Une membre d'une Première Nation. Ça, c'est quand même spécial. Pour la première fois.
Catherine Champagne-Jourdain, Innu from Quebec's north coast, made history when she landed a seat in the National Assembly after the October 3rd election. During the cabinet shuffle, she made history again, this time as Quebec's first ever Indigenous minister. She'll be handling employment.
Je vais faire le bout que je peux faire avec toute la volonté qui m'anime.
Legault says her appointment is a sign of good faith, a way to strengthen nation-to-nation relationships, but not everyone's convinced.
So far, anyways, I don't see any change of heart.
While Champagne-Jourdain gets her first shot, other ministers are getting second chances.
Monsieur Pierre Fitzgibbon.
Pierre Fitzgibbon, the former finance minister who resigned in 2021 after being investigated for ethics violations, is now Quebec's super minister of economy and energy, stoking fears Quebec will use Fitzgibbon's new powers to push development of hydro dams against the wishes of both Hydro-Quebec and First Nations communities. A development roundtable is coming, but
I've already asked whether this table will have a place for First Nations. And what I got so far is an indication that probably not. To me, that's totally unacceptable.
Jean Boulet.
Jean Boulet, the former immigration minister who recently claimed 80% of immigrants do not work, do not speak French, and do not adhere to the values of Quebec society, is now responsible for the northern region encompassing Cree and Inuit territory, two areas also grappling with development fears. Cree Grand Chief Mandigal Masti set her expectations in an interview with APTN News immediately following the election.
You really need to establish that relationship. You have to, have that connection. You have to have that dialogue, and you have to he has to be prepared to understand that there is a type of development that Indigenous peoples may accept, and there's also a range that they will not accept.
But acting as the intermediary for another term is Indigenous Affairs Minister Yann Lafrenière, who will prioritize policing, child welfare, and a possible Indigenous language law on his second go-round.
We'll keep a close watch, as we always do, on how these things evolve and react accordingly if we feel that there's a need to do it.
Quebec's National Assembly resumes sittings on November 29th. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
To the west coast now, in the Tahltan Nation, and the government of British Columbia announced they are working together on an accord for a wildlife stewardship plan in the nation's territory in the northern part of the province. The goal will be to use Tahltan knowledge to protect wildlife, culture, and a way of life. According to a press release, the British Columbia Accord on Wildlife Management will address the concerns of the Tahltan Nation over predator management and caribou restoration. The accord will include joint wildlife governance co-management and information sharing between the Tahltan central government and the province of BC. One of Nunavut's longest-serving politicians has decided to call it a career after nearly 30 years in office. James Italuk has been an elected vice president of Nunavut Tungavik for 29 years, since before Nunavut was a territory. He announced his retirement this week at Tungavik's annual meeting. Italuk is an advocate for Inuit hunting rights, and we've had him on APTN National News often over the years. In 2013, we asked him about polar bears and television commercials, something he isn't a fan of.
Hug it, Whoever's going to hug it, it's in danger. The polar bear going to have a meal.
And the Northwest Territories now, where the territory has the second highest rate of family violence in Canada. The territorial government hopes to put that statistic in the past.
I'm Charlotte Moore-Jacobs. Coming up soon on APTN National News, we'll find out how tools such as men's sharing circles are being used to address missing and murdered Indigenous women north of 60.
Confronting it, being in person, I find that's really helpful.
Increasing cultural appropriate programs and services is a main focus of the Northwest Territories MMIWG 3-year draft action plan.
Not just the leaders, but in the communities, we need to hold each other accountable for.
We'll learn about the creation of the 95 Northern Specific Calls to Action and what happens once the plan is tabled early November.
Welcome back. After a scathing report was released last month by advocacy groups and Indigenous communities, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary admits they have an internal problem with systemic racism and injustices to Indigenous peoples. As APTN's Angel Moore reports, the police force says they will do better.
Almost 3 years ago, the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls was presented to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Since then, people still walk and rally, raising awareness of MMIWG report. The Royal Newfoundland Constabulary has been around since 1729. This week in St. John's, the oldest police force in North America committed to following the MMIWG calls to justice. Constable James Cadigan speaks for the Constabulary. He says building relationships means better policing.
This particular relationship is that we look to develop with our Indigenous people of Newfoundland and Labrador. It's very important that we are doing so in partnership with and with leadership from members of that community.
Cadigan was speaking a month after the First Voice Urban Indigenous Coalition from St. John's issued their own report on policing called Building Trust, Restoring Confidence. That report says Newfoundland and Labrador's provincial police force has some of the least effective transparency and accountability, especially for the 45,000 Indigenous people who live on the island.
RNC executive team has reviewed the report. And I mean, anytime we have an opportunity to see progress, growth, and change in the betterment of our police service, we will certainly do so.
Building Trust, Restoring Confidence has 26 recommendations, including one for a civilian oversight board with Indigenous representation, and it echoes the implementation of the MMIWG's calls for justice. After a private meeting with RNC in St. John's this week, First Voice Coalition's Justin Campbell is optimistic.
We are encouraged by that announcement because only a short time ago, there wasn't even a conversation happening between First Voice and the RNC in terms of systemic racism, much less how we start to solve that problem here in St. John's and across the province.
First Voice has agreed to help the RNC improve their accountability. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabukduk, known as Halifax.
Thanks, Angel. ICT journalist Marionette Pember has been investigating Indian boarding schools south of the Medicine Line. I spoke with Pember about her investigation earlier in the week. Mary, thanks so much for joining us and for your work on this. Can you tell us a bit about your investigation with ICT?
Yes, we took a look specifically at Red Cloud Indian School. It has been in existence since 1888 and was formerly a boarding school, but now operates as a day school on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And they have started a truth and healing effort with the tribe, and we kind of went out. We wanted to kick the tires on it and take a look at what they're doing, and also, ask people in the community, how they felt and what they would like to see done, and their opinion on what the school has done so far.
What were some of the things that your investigation was able to discover?
Well, while we were there, they actually began doing ground penetrating radar searches on some parts of the school, and there was a former student and a former worker at the school who reported that back in the 1990s he had seen 3 graves marked with small crosses in the basement of one of the historic dorms, Drexel dorm. He never came forward because he was really the reaction from the school, from the brother at the time that he told him, whom he told about the findings, was very angry with him and instructed him not to tell anybody, but it really bothered him. And after the discoveries of graves up in Canada, he really felt that he had to come forward. So he came forward earlier this year. And so the school actually conducted some ground penetrating radar in the basement of that building. And as we speak, they are now removing the concrete and sifting through the dirt underneath to see what they can find.
Wow. What are some of the other tribes that are involved in the latest searches?
You know, I don't know all of the tribes. There are some, kind of, just individual work that people are doing that may not really be on the radar. I just noticed that in Kansas, they will begin doing some ground penetrating radar searching. There really hasn't been a lot done so far here.
Mary, do you think that this situation in the U.S. is kind of mirroring what Canada's going through with the reckoning this year with the suspected unmarked graves?
One would hope so. However, I think that there will be a great deal of resistance here in the United States. There are far more schools here that operated, perhaps like at least 50% more. The population was greater here. And I think there's a great deal of trepidation in the United States about reparations. I think they don't want to go there, in the same route that Canada has done. And I think there's a great fear about that. However, it's there, it's coming out, and it's a truth that can no longer be ignored.
That fear, you think, is on the part of the U.S. government?
Big time. Yes, I think, money, of course, is, I think, we're seeing a lot of political opposition. For instance, there is a boarding school commission act in Congress right now. And I think that there is a great fear among some legislators that there would be a financial burden on the United States. Also, churches, as in Canada, have been quite reluctant to open up their records and, to be fully transparent about their role. And their role, as well as in Canada, was great here in the United States, and it hasn't really been known until recently.
Mary, we know Deb Haaland, the minister, is doing this Path to Healing tour. How has the U.S. government been responding so far?
Yes, that's the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, who's actually a member she's a citizen of the Laguna Pueblo. She's the first Native person to hold that position. It's really the highest governmental position under the president in response to basically to Native policies here in the United States. She has been going around the country and doing what she calls conducting healing tours. She conducted the third one just last week in the Great Plains area on the Rosebud Reservation, and people they've been very greatly attended, and people have been welcoming them and telling their stories. So she wanted to give people, at the very least, an opportunity to do this. This is part of her initiative, looking into doing an investigation into the boarding school history here in the United States. However, there are no consequences. There's no teeth, as it were, in this initiative. But of course, the act would have some. But even in the initiative, at least she is going forward and really giving people an opportunity to share their stories and presenting it to the American public.
Well, Mary, like I said, great work on this, really leading the way. You got your podcast and everything. Appreciate you taking some time to talk to us about it.
Sure, I'm glad to be here. And my podcast is on revealnews.org. Thank you.
An elder, a hockey player, and a former senator are all becoming members of the Order of Canada. That story and more coming up after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. This one comes to us from Gail Finch. Gail was recently visiting Muskoka, Ontario, 3 hours north of Toronto. Looks like a great place for some time on a canoe or kayak. Those beautiful fall colors. Thanks, Gail. You can email your photos to share@aptn.ca for a chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at your Saturday weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 17 for Halifax and Charlottetown. +7 with rain in Kuujjuaq, cloudy and 10 in Nain. Sunny and 19 for Montreal, 13 with showers in Chibougamau. 16 in Sault Ste. Marie, 18 for North Bay. 13 with showers in Thunder Bay, 10 and rain in Sioux Lookout. Sunny and 5 for God's Lake and Norway House. 10 with showers in Winnipeg, 12 in Dauphin. 11 for Regina, 10 in Saskatoon. 7 with showers in Meadow Lake, 5 in Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, snow almost everywhere, +3 in Fort McMurray, 4 in Grand Prairie. 8 and cloudy in Edmonton, snow and 7 in Lethbridge. 12 for Vancouver, Victoria and Penticton. 6 with rain in Prince George, sunny and 6 in Smithers. -4 with snow in Old Crow, +2 and snow in Whitehorse. -4 in Yellowknife, flurries and 4 below in Norman Wells. -17 in Sax Harbor, snow and -5 in Pawlutuck. -2 in Chesterfield, +1 in Arviat. -17 in Resolute, 18 below with snow in Joe Haven. The same week, Governor General Mary Simon stripped Inuk actor Johnny Isaluk of his Order of Canada. She handed out the honour to 3 more Indigenous people on Thursday at Rideau Hall in Ottawa. Here's Annette Francis with those details.
The Honourable Lillian Dick was recognized for her lifelong work for social justice and equality for women, First Nations, and racial minorities. As a senator, she pushed for ways to address violence against women. She also pushed for legislators to take the issue of missing or murdered Indigenous women and girls seriously. Elder Doreen Spence is one of the first Indigenous women to graduate as a licensed practical nurse. She helped draft the United Nations Declaration that established global human rights standards. Also honored was the Riverton Rifle, Reggie Leach, the former right-winger for the Philadelphia Flyers. He was acknowledged for building healthy communities through sports and public speaking about his successes and struggles. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Congrats to all those receiving the order. Years before the Indian residential school settlement was finalized, survivors across the country filed individual lawsuits against the government and the church. And in those lawsuits, they named their abusers. Brittany Guillot joins us now to discuss her story, Black Robes. Brittany, good to have you with us. You went through 146 Manitoba lawsuits. Can you tell us what they were about?
Yeah, so I requested all the civil lawsuits filed against the Catholic order known as the Oblates of Mary Immaculate. They ran 8 of the residential schools in the province of Manitoba, and so I spent the summer going through the documents at the courthouse here in Winnipeg, reading through case after case, and what I found was nothing short of horrific. Nearly every single lawsuit named an alleged abuser. There's a total of 82 oblate priests and nuns whose name appeared as a perpetrator.
What can you tell us about the people who were named in the lawsuits?
So it was everyone named from the priests, the nuns, the school supervisors, the teachers, and even a bishop was named. And many names came up multiple times in separate lawsuits over the decades, including Father Plamondon, who was named in 32 individual lawsuits, as well as Father Arthur Massé, who was recently charged with indecent assault at the Fort Alexander Residential School. He appeared in 5 separate lawsuits. So the court documents really provided a lot of information about the residential school experience.
Indeed. Brittany, what are survivors saying about this?
Well, in the lawsuits, survivors stated that they had notified authorities of the alleged abuses numerous times, but as we know, no charges were ever filed. So many of the survivors that I've spoken with, they say that they wish that there would have been more accountability for the individuals who they allege abused them at residential schools.
Well, Brittany, important work. Looking forward to the episode. Thanks for taking some time to talk to us about it.
Thanks, Dennis.
And you can watch Brittany's investigation on APTN Investigates in a little over a minute's time right here. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Friday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Stick around. Investigates is up next. Have a great night.